In this video, I am going to be talking about 20 great games that I think deserve more attention. These are some of the games that I truly wish more people played, so let's look at the first game on our list. GreedFall. GreedFall is one of those games that flew under the radar for a lot of people, but honestly it's an RPG that deserves way more love. Developed by Spiders, it's got that classic BioWare vibe with a deep focus on choice, diplomacy, and exploration. You're dropped into a 17th century inspired fantasy world, where colonialism, politics, and magic collide, and from the moment you start, it's clear there's more here than just your typical sword-swinging adventure. You play as D. Sardate, a diplomat sent to the mysterious island of Tirfredi. The island is teeming with mysteries, strange creatures, and warring factions, each with their own agendas. What I love about GreedFall is how it blends historical themes with fantasy elements. You've got muskets and sabers alongside magical powers and giant, mystical creatures. It's not just another open-world RPG, it's this weird, cool mix of old-world charm and supernatural intrigue, and it works. Where GreedFall shines is in its focus on player choice. You're not just hacking your way through enemies though, there's plenty of combat if that's your thing. A lot of the game revolves around how you approach situations. Do you negotiate peace between factions, or do you side with one and wipe out the other? Your decisions have a real impact on the world and how the story plays out, and it's not just about being good or evil, it's about navigating the gray areas in between, where no choice is easy.
After this little swim, you can always try to pull the trigger.
The combat system is solid too. It's not the deepest out there, but it's got enough variety to keep things interesting. You can mix and match different styles, melee, ranged, and magic, so you can switch up your approach based on the situation. And with the companions you pick up along the way, you can fine-tune your team to handle anything the game throws at you. Each companion has their own story, and their relationships with you can shift depending on your choices, which adds another layer of depth. If you're a fan of RPGs that give you meaningful choices, complex relationships, and a world full of mystery to dive into, GreedFall is one you need to check out. It's not the biggest or the flashiest, but it's got a soul, and that's what makes it stand out. Before Your Eyes.
Every time that you blink, you're gonna jump forward in time.
Before Your Eyes is one of those emotional, unique experiences that hits you hard and fast. The game's main hook is that you control it by blinking, literally using your webcam. Every time you blink, the story jumps forward in time. It's a simple mechanic, but it's incredibly effective, especially given the game's focus on memory and regret. You play as a recently deceased soul looking back on your life. Each blink skips you through important moments from childhood to adulthood, and it's crazy how quickly these moments pass by, just like real life. The story digs deep into themes of family loss and the choices we make, things that are super relatable, which makes the emotional hits land even harder.
It's Chloe, your neighbor.
The gameplay is straightforward, with most of the interaction coming from the blinking mechanic, but that's where the brilliance lies. It forces you to let go, to accept that you can't hold on to moments forever, even the ones you wish would last. It's short, maybe a couple of hours, but in that time it manages to tell a full, heartfelt story that sticks with you long after it's done. No filler, just a tight, emotional narrative wrapped in a truly original gameplay mechanic. If you're looking for something that's more of an emotional experience than a traditional game, Before Your Eyes is a must-play.
Ready to come up here? That's just how this thing works.
Valiant Hearts: The Great War. Valiant Hearts is a beautifully crafted game that tells a personal, emotional story set during World War I. What makes it stand out is how it humanizes the war. You're not playing as a soldier mowing down enemies. Instead, you follow 4 characters and a dog who are just trying to survive and find their loved ones. Each character has their own struggles, and the way their stories intertwine gives the game real emotional weight. The art style is hand-drawn, and it's simple yet powerful. It makes the brutal backdrop of World War I feel even more surreal. The gameplay is mostly puzzle solving with a little bit of stealth and exploration thrown in. It's not hard, but that's not the point. The game is more focused on telling a story that makes you feel something.
Not for glory.
The narrative hits hard because it's based on real letters from the war, which adds a layer of authenticity. You get a sense of how ordinary people were affected by the chaos of war, and it doesn't shy away from showing the horrors, even though it's told in a somewhat cartoony style. It's a short game, but the impact it leaves is lasting. Valiant Hearts doesn't glorify war, it shows the human side of it, the loss, the pain, and the small acts of hope that keep people going.
Valiant Hearts.
Life is Strange 2.
We're different, but we can't go back.
The original Life is Strange was great, no doubts, but I see many people ignoring the second part for, well, obvious reasons, but I still think it's a great game. Life is Strange 2 is one of those games that hit me harder than I expected. It's not just another coming-of-age story, it's a road trip filled with heartache, tough choices, and moments that really make you pause and think. You play as Sean Diaz, a teenage kid who's forced to go on the run with his little brother Daniel after a tragic incident changes their lives in an instant. The core of the game is the bond between these two brothers, and man, the way it evolves feels so real. You're not just making decisions for yourself, you're shaping Daniel, who looks up to you and reacts to everything you do.
We'll be fine.
The game throws you into a lot of different environments, from forests to deserts to small towns, and each place has its own vibe. You meet all these different people along the way, and some are genuinely kind while others not so much. It keeps you on edge, not knowing who to trust, and that tension makes the quieter moments between Sean and Daniel hit even harder. By the time I finished, I felt like I'd been through something with these characters. It's emotional, sometimes brutal, but always genuine. If you're into games that make you care about the people in them and force you to face some tough moral questions, Life is Strange 2 delivers in a way that feels deeply personal.
Daniel?
Leave me alone!
Do it, Daniel! Now!
Call of Juarez Gunslinger.
Making my way past the Castle of Fallen.
Call of Juarez Gunslinger is one of those games that knows exactly what it's doing and just has fun with it. It's a fast-paced, over-the-top Wild West shooter, but what really sets it apart is how it tells its story. You play as Silas Greaves, an old bounty hunter telling tales of his legendary exploits, and the whole game is framed as him recounting these stories in a saloon. What's cool is that Silas is kind of an unreliable narrator, so the story can change on the fly, sometimes literally. 1 second you're in the middle of a shootout, and the next, the environment shifts or enemies pop out of nowhere because Silas forgot to mention them. The gunplay is where the game shines. It's all about quick reflexes, racking up combos, and pulling off slick headshots in slow motion. It's super satisfying, especially when you get into the flow of it. The duels are a highlight too. You're not just mindlessly shooting, there's a tension to drawing your gun at the perfect moment, and when you nail it, it feels awesome.
Man, that you killed in a fair.
What I really liked is how the game doesn't take itself too seriously. The tone is light and full of Western cliches, but in a fun way. It's all exaggerated, from the insane number of outlaws you gun down to the larger-than-life characters you meet or shoot along the way, like Billy the Kid and Jesse James. It feels like you're playing through a comic book version of the Old West with every moment turned up to 11. Call of Juarez Gunslinger isn't long, but it packs in a lot of fun in its short runtime. It's one of those games where you just want to keep replaying certain sections, because the combat is so satisfying. If you're looking for a game that's all about stylish, arcade-style shooting with a quirky twist on storytelling, this one's definitely worth your time.
Making my way past the Castle of Fallen.
Hey guys, before we continue the video, let's talk about the sponsor of this video. I've got something exciting for all the strategy game lovers out there. If you haven't heard of Stormshot yet, you're in for a treat. I've partnered with Aptoide to give you an awesome deal. All you have to do is download Stormshot using the link in the description below, and you'll get an exclusive 5% bonus on your in-game purchases when you use my code PDragonstorm. But that's not even the best part. Over time, you can stack that up to a 25% bonus on all your purchases, so you're basically saving every time you buy something in the game. Who doesn't love that? Here's how it works first. Download Stormshot through Aptoide super easy, just click the link. Then you'll want to install the AppCoins wallet, which is also linked down below. This is where you'll enter the promo code PDragonstorm to get your bonuses. The process is quick, and you'll start seeing that bonus cash right away. Make sure to check the description for all the links you need: the game download, the AppCoins wallet, and of course that promo code. Remember, this offer is only around for a limited time, so don't miss out. Go ahead, get Stormshot installed, and start earning those sweet bonuses today. The Surge. The Surge is one of those games that came out of nowhere for me, but man, if you're into the Souls-like genre, this one brings something fresh to the table. Set in a dystopian future where corporations are running wild, you play as Warren, a guy who starts out in a wheelchair but soon gets outfitted with this exosuit that turns him into a walking tank. The game takes that Dark Souls formula hard as nails combat, brutal enemies, and a deep sense of exploration, but adds a unique twist with its sci-fi setting and the whole limb targeting system. That's one of the coolest parts about the Surge. Instead of just whacking away at enemies, you can target specific body parts. Want that shiny new arm piece your enemy's wearing? You have to literally cut it off in combat and salvage it. It adds a layer of strategy to the fights, because you're not just trying to survive, you're also constantly thinking about how to upgrade your gear and take advantage of enemy weaknesses. The world of the Surge is grim, and while it's mostly industrial factories and rundown facilities, it fits the tone perfectly. You're exploring this corporate hellscape full of killer robots, rogue security systems, and other exosuit-wearing maniacs. And yeah, it's tough. If you're not paying attention, enemies will wreck you. But the game rewards patience and precision, so when you finally take down a tough boss or get past a tricky area, it feels earned. One thing I'll say is that the Surge can feel a bit repetitive, especially with its environments and some of the enemies, but the combat is what keeps it interesting. If you're into challenging, methodical gameplay with a sci-fi twist, this one is definitely worth checking out. It's not as polished as some other games in the genre, but it's got enough unique ideas to stand on its own. A Plague Tale Requiem. A Plague Tale Requiem is one of those rare sequels that builds on everything that made the first game great and then cranks it up. You're back in the grim, plague-ridden world of 14th century France, and once again, you're guiding Amicia and her younger brother Hugo through a world that's just as dangerous from the rats as it is from the people in it. The game hits hard with its story right from the start. It's darker, more intense, and there's a real sense of desperation as Amicia fights to protect Hugo, who's still dealing with his terrifying connection to the rat plague. The relationship between these two is at the heart of the game, and it's handled so well. You feel every moment of tension, every close call, every sacrifice Amicia makes. It's emotional without being over the top, and it really pulls you in. Gameplay-wise, Requiem sticks to its roots with stealth, puzzle solving, and action, but everything feels a bit more refined this time around. The environments are bigger, more varied, and the game gives you more tools to deal with threats. You can still sneak past enemies or use the rats to your advantage, but there are more ways to approach each situation, and it keeps things from feeling repetitive. The rats themselves are a huge part of the atmosphere. Just like in the first game, there are even more of them now, swarming in ways that look impossible to survive. But the game uses them in creative ways, making them both a threat and a tool, depending on how you play. And the environments, they're stunning. From ruined cities to haunting landscapes, the world feels alive in a way that makes you want to explore, even though danger is lurking around every corner. The story really ramps up the stakes, and without spoiling anything, it does not hold back. The emotional toll on Amicia and Hugo is palpable, and by the end, it's hard not to feel invested in their fate. Requiem knows how to deliver a narrative that sticks with you, while also keeping the gameplay tight and engaging.
I don't know what's happening to me, Lucas.
The Council.
Lord Mortimer asked me to join him.
The Council is one of those hidden gems that more people should have picked up. It's like a narrative-driven detective game, but with this cool RPG twist. You play as Louis de Richet, who's invited to a secret island by a mysterious political group in the late 1700s. The game throws you right into a world of conspiracies, historical figures, and crazy mind games.
Please.
What sets the Council apart is how it handles choices in dialogue. It's not just about picking a response and watching things play out. You actually use skills to manipulate people, gather info, and push the story in different directions. Every choice feels weighty, and depending on how you build your character, you'll solve problems in different ways. It's not like most narrative games where you're just along for the ride here. You really shape how things play out.
And secrecy are both pillars of the organizations for which we work.
You know, Louis, I've only just now realized that I've been drawn here.
The Forgotten City. The Forgotten City is one of those underrated gems that really deserves more attention. Originally a Skyrim mod, it evolved into a full game that's all about unraveling a mystery set in an ancient Roman city trapped in a time loop. And the catch? If even one person in the city sins, everyone dies, so no pressure, right? The game's all about talking to people, piecing together clues, and figuring out who's going to break the golden rule. It's less about combat and more about using your brain and paying attention to details. Every time the loop resets, you carry the knowledge forward, which makes every conversation and discovery feel important.
Everyone will die.
What's really cool is how it blends history, philosophy, and morality. You're constantly faced with tough choices, and the game doesn't hold your hand. You need to think through the consequences of your actions. And the setting feels alive, and the way it weaves in ancient Roman culture makes it feel unique compared to most narrative-driven games. The Forgotten City is smart, engaging, and has one of the best use of time loops in gaming. It's the kind of game that sneaks up on you and leaves you thinking about it long after it's over. Definitely a must-play for fans of mystery and choice-driven games.
Salve, friend.
Spec Ops: The Line. Spec Ops: The Line is one of those games that people need to play but somehow missed. On the surface, it looks like just another military shooter, but it's anything but. You play as Captain Martin Walker, leading a team into a ruined Dubai to track down a rogue colonel. Pretty standard setup, right? Well, that's not it. As the game unfolds, it becomes less about the mission and more about Walker's slow descent into madness. The game flips the script on traditional shooters by making you question everything you're doing. You think you're the hero, but Spec Ops pulls no punches in showing the brutal reality of war and how it can twist even the best intentions into something horrific. The decisions you make aren't just about gameplay, they're about morality. There's no right choice. Every action feels heavier the deeper you go, and the game forces you to confront the consequences in ways most shooters don't even attempt. By the end, it's not just a game about soldiers, it's a game about the cost of violence both for the people you fight and for yourself. If you're looking for a shooter with real emotional weight and a story that stays with you long after you've finished, Spec Ops: The Line is one of the best. It's criminally underrated and should be on everyone's radar. As Dusk Falls. As Dusk Falls is one of those underrated gems that's all about the story and the choices you make. It's a crime drama at heart, set in small-town America and revolves around two families whose lives collide during a robbery gone wrong. What sets this game apart is how it doesn't just focus on one moment, but how that one night spirals out over years, shaping everyone involved. The game is heavily choice-driven, and those choices matter. It's not just pick A or B, the decisions you make can have real consequences, and there's this constant tension of not knowing if you're doing the right thing. Plus, the way it handles dialogue and branching paths gives you a real sense of control over the story.
You want to throw someone in the back? Why don't you start with me?
The art style is unique too. It's this mix of motion comic and live action, which might throw you off at first, but it actually works in creating a really emotional, almost raw feel to the narrative. The characters are flawed, human, and dealing with real gritty issues. You end up caring about what happens to them, which is rare in a lot of games. As Dusk Falls may not have the mainstream hype, but it's one of the most emotionally engaging and well-crafted narrative experiences out there. If you're into games that are more about tough choices and real human stories than action, this one's definitely worth checking out.
Family means sacrifice.
Days Gone. Days Gone is one of those games that didn't get the love it deserved when it first dropped, but man, it's way better than people give it credit for. You play as Deacon St. John, a biker turned drifter in a post-apocalyptic world overrun by freakers, basically zombies, but more intense. It's a mix of open world exploration, survival, and some really personal storytelling. What makes Days Gone special is the world. The Pacific Northwest setting is stunning, and the dynamic weather and day-night cycles actually impact how you play. Freakers are more aggressive at night, and the weather can mess with how you handle both them and the human enemies you face. The game keeps you on your toes, and traveling through the world on your bike adds a cool, unique layer to it all. Your bike isn't just for show, it's essential for survival, and you're constantly upgrading and maintaining it. The story is deeper than it looks at first glance. Sure, it's a post-apocalyptic zombie game, but Deacon's journey is about more than just survival, it's about loss, grief, and hope. The relationship between Deacon and his wife Sarah is at the core, and you're constantly learning more about what happened to her. The game hits some emotional beats, especially when it digs into Deacon's past and how he's coping with the world around him.
Dig, bro. And I know what kind of man.
Combat and stealth are solid, but what really stands out are the freaker hordes. These aren't your typical slow zombies, they come at you in massive groups, and if you're not prepared, they'll overwhelm you fast. Taking on a horde is a mix of strategy, planning, and straight up panic, and it's one of the most intense parts of the game. Days Gone may have launched with some bugs, but it's since been patched up, and what you're left with is an open world game that's way more engaging than a lot of people realize. It's got heart, solid gameplay, and a world that feels dangerous but alive. If you skipped it, it's definitely worth revisiting. The Order 1886. The Order 1886 is a game that got a lot of flack when it first released, but honestly, it's way more underrated than people give it credit for. Set in an alternate Victorian London, the game throws you into a world where steampunk tech meets Arthurian legend. You play as Sir Galahad, part of an elite group known as the Order, tasked with keeping the peace and battling half-breed werewolves and other supernatural threats. What stands out immediately is the visuals. This game looks incredible even years later. The graphics are cinematic, the lighting is stunning, and the attention to detail in the environments is insane. It feels like you're playing a high-budget movie, and the world they've built has so much depth. The alternate history vibe, mixed with the steampunk gadgets and tech, gives the whole thing a really cool, unique atmosphere. But yeah, people criticize it for being too short, and sure, it doesn't have a huge runtime, maybe 6 to 7 hours, but what's there is solid. The story dives into conspiracy, betrayal, and mythology, and while it's pretty linear, it keeps you hooked from start to finish. The combat is your standard cover-based third-person shooting, but with some slick weapons like the thermite rifle, which lets you burn enemies in clouds of flames. Where the Order 1886 shines most is in presentation and world building. The lore is rich, and it's clear the developers were laying the groundwork for a bigger universe. It's just a shame we didn't get a sequel because there's so much potential in this world. So yeah, it's not perfect, but the Order 1886 is way better than it gets credit for. If you're into cinematic games with a strong atmosphere and tight storytelling, it's definitely worth checking out, even if just for the experience. Sleeping Dogs. Sleeping Dogs is one of the most underrated open world games out there. It's basically a love letter to Hong Kong action films, with you playing as Wei Shen, an undercover cop trying to take down the triads from the inside. The story is a solid mix of crime drama and personal stakes, with Wei constantly balancing his duty as a cop and his loyalty to the people he's infiltrated. What really sets Sleeping Dogs apart from other open world games is the combat. It's got a slick hand-to-hand system that's more like a martial arts brawler than your standard shootout fest. Think Batman Arkham style, but with a focus on brutal takedowns and environmental attacks. You're slamming guys into fish tanks, car doors, and pretty much anything that's lying around, and it never gets old. The driving is also top-notch. Hong Kong is your playground, and the game gives you a ton of vehicles to mess around with. There's this cool action movie feel to the way chases are handled, where you can hijack cars mid-drive or shoot out tires in slow motion. It keeps things fast-paced and fun.
Holy shit, Tyler, what the fuck drive? Wait, drive.
What a lot of people miss about Sleeping Dogs is the story depth. It's not just about taking down a crime syndicate, it's about identity, loyalty, and how far you'll go before you lose yourself. White's journey is compelling because he's constantly torn between his undercover mission and the brotherhood he's building with the gang. It's got some real emotional moments that catch you off guard, and the setting Hong Kong feels alive. The city's bustling with activity from neon-lit streets to shady back alleys. It's one of the few games where the location feels like a character itself, with all the food stands, street vendors, and cultural details adding to the immersion. If you slept on Sleeping Dogs, it's time to wake up. It's got tight combat, a killer story, and a world that feels genuinely alive. One of the best crime dramas in gaming, hands down. Evil West. Evil West is one of those games that flew under the radar but deserves way more attention. Imagine a mix of classic westerns and over-the-top supernatural action, and you've got a pretty good idea of what this game is about. You play as Jesse Rentier, a vampire hunting cowboy in a world where monsters and supernatural creatures are a real threat, and it's your job to wipe them out in the most brutal, badass way possible. The combat is where Evil West shines. It's fast, heavy, and super satisfying. You've got guns, electrified gauntlets, and a bunch of wild weapons that let you punch, shoot, and blast your way through hordes of enemies. The combat feels tight, and every punch or shot lands with a satisfying crunch. It's all about chaining together combos, using the environment to your advantage, and mixing up your attacks to keep things fresh. It's not just mindless action, there's a real rhythm to it, and it keeps you engaged the whole way through. The setting is unique too. It's this wild mashup of the Old West and dark fantasy, and it works. The world feels gritty and lived in, but it's also full of weird creatures and dark secrets. It's got that Wild Wild West meets Van Helsing vibe, which makes the whole thing feel like a big bloody action flick. You're not just fighting vampires, but all kinds of supernatural beasts, and the variety in enemies keeps the action from getting stale. The story is straightforward, no big twists or emotional depth, but that's not what you're here for. It's a fun, action-packed ride that knows exactly what it wants to be, a game where you kick monster ass in a stylized, violent Western world. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and that's part of the charm. If you're into games that focus on combat, style, and just pure fun, Evil West delivers. It's one of those games that knows exactly what it's doing and nails it. Definitely underrated and worth a play if you want a break from all the overly complex narratives out there. Hifi Rush. Hifi Rush is one of those games that came out of nowhere and ended up being a breath of fresh air. It's a rhythm-based action game where the entire world moves to the beat, and that concept alone makes it stand out. You play as Chai, a guy who accidentally gets a music player fused into his chest. Yeah, it's as crazy as it sounds, and now everything around him from combat to the environment syncs up to the music. The combat is the real hook here. It's all about timing your attacks to the beat of the soundtrack, which makes every punch, kick, and combo feel satisfying as hell when you nail it. You don't have to stick to the rhythm to win fights, but if you do, the game rewards you with bigger damage and slick, satisfying animations. It's like Devil May Cry meets a rhythm game, and that combination is a blast. The music fuels everything, so you're constantly moving, attacking, and dodging in sync with the soundtrack, and it creates this awesome flow in the middle of combat. The game's got this slick, CL-shaded art style that pops with vibrant colors, and the whole world has a kind of comic book energy. The characters, especially Chai, are full of personality, and the dialogue doesn't take itself too seriously. There's a fun, goofy charm to everything, which keeps the mood light even when the action gets intense. Hifi Rush is the kind of game that doesn't overstay its welcome. It's fast-paced fun, and doesn't try to be more than it is a wild, rhythm-fueled ride. It's definitely underrated, and if you like rhythm games or stylish action, this one's worth your time. It's got heart, style, and gameplay that feels fresh and engaging. Quantum Break. Quantum Break is one of those games that got overlooked by a lot of people, but if you're into story-driven action with a twist, this one's a hidden gem. It's a mix of third-person shooting, time manipulation, and a full-on live-action TV show integrated into the game. Sounds weird, right? But it actually works. You play as Jack Joyce, a guy who gets caught in a failed time experiment that gives him the ability to control time. From there, it's all about taking down enemies while bending time to your will. The time powers are what make the game special. You can stop time around enemies, dash across the battlefield, and even create time shields to block attacks. It's not just a gimmick either. Using these powers in combination with gunplay makes combat feel fresh. You're not just shooting, you're playing with time in a way that makes each fight feel like a puzzle. Pulling off a combo where you freeze a guy midair, then dash to another spot to take out his buddy is just satisfying. But what really makes Quantum Break stand out is the way it merges the game with a TV show. Between gameplay chapters, there are live action episodes that show you the other side of the story, mostly from the villain's perspective. And the cool part? The choices you make in the game change what happens in the show. It's a bold idea, and while it's not perfect, it gives the game a unique narrative experience you don't see often. The story is classic Remedy, with a lot of mind-bending twists and sci-fi elements. It's not as deep as Control or Alan Wake, but it's engaging, especially if you like time travel plots and the consequences that come with messing with the timeline. The only downside is that it can feel a little short, and the integration of the live-action show isn't for everyone. But if you're looking for an action game that tries something different and pulls it off in a cool way, Quantum Break is definitely worth your time. It's got slick combat, a solid story, and a style that's hard to forget. Batman the Telltale series. Batman the Telltale series takes the Dark Knight in a different direction from the usual action-heavy games. This one's all about narrative and choices. If you've played any of Telltale's other games, you know the deal dialogue-driven gameplay where your decisions shape the story, but with a cool twist, you're not just playing as Batman. You spend a good chunk of the game as Bruce Wayne, which adds a new layer to the character. The choices in this game really matter. It's not just about punching bad guys, it's about dealing with Gotham's corruption, balancing your dual life as Bruce and Batman, and deciding how far you're willing to go. Do you handle things as the detective, or do you let Batman's fist do the talking? Your decisions affect your relationships with key characters like Alfred, Harvey Dent, and Catwoman, and there's always that looming question: how much of yourself are you willing to sacrifice for Gotham? The story dives into some classic Batman lore but takes some risks with it, which keeps it fresh. Villains like the Penguin and Two-Face are reimagined in interesting ways, and you get a look at the Wayne family's darker history, which gives Bruce a more personal struggle. It's less about beating up bad guys and more about the psychological toll of being Batman.
You really think you're in control here? You have no one.
And while the combat is mostly quick-time events, this is a Telltale game. After all, the game's strength is in its storytelling. The dialogue options feel weighty, and the game forces you to make tough calls that'll shape Gotham's future. Plus, seeing how your choices play out over time adds a nice touch of replayability, even if the game itself isn't super long. If you're a Batman fan looking for something more narrative-driven, or if you just like games where your decisions shape the outcome, Batman the Telltale series is a great pick. It's not your typical action-packed Batman game, but it dives deep into the character and what it means to wear the mask. The Wolf Among Us.
All right, everyone.
The Wolf Among Us is easily one of Telltale's best and most underrated games. Set in the dark, gritty world of Fables, a comic book series where fairy tale characters live in the real world, you play as Bigby Wolf, the sheriff of Fabletown. And yeah, you guessed it, Bigby is the big bad wolf. But this isn't a cute fairy tale. It's a hard-boiled noir detective story with murder, corruption, and a dark underbelly of characters you thought you knew. The game is all about choices, and as Bigby, you have to decide how you're going to handle each situation. Do you go full wolf and let your temper fly, or try to be more diplomatic? Your decisions shape the way the story unfolds and how other characters react to you, and there's a real sense of consequence with every dialogue option. The cast of characters is fantastic: Snow White, the Woodsman, and more, all reimagined with a darker edge, and each interaction feels important. Visually, the game's comic book style art fits perfectly with the tone. It's dark, moody, and dripping with atmosphere. It feels like stepping into a noir graphic novel, and the setting of Fabletown grimy and full of secrets adds to that immersion. The Wolf Among Us might not have gotten as much attention as Telltale's Walking Dead, but it's easily one of their best works. If you like detective stories with a twist, characters that matter, and choices that leave an impact, this one is a must-play. And let's be real, who doesn't want to play as the big bad wolf solving murders? Mafia Definitive Edition. Mafia Definitive Edition is an underrated gem, especially for anyone who loves classic crime stories. It's a full remake of the original 2002 Mafia game, and it brings that old school mobster vibe back in style. You play as Tommy Angelo, a taxi driver turned mobster who gets caught up in the world of organized crime in the 1930s. The story is classic, full of betrayal, loyalty, and the rise and fall of a man trying to make it in a corrupt world. What makes Mafia Definitive Edition stand out is its storytelling. It's a tight, character-driven narrative that feels like a classic mob movie. The writing and voice acting are top-notch, and you really feel connected to Tommy's journey from an outsider to a key player in the Salieri crime family. Every mission pushes the story forward, and it's packed with cinematic moments that feel straight out of The Godfather or Goodfellas. The city of Lost Heaven is beautifully recreated. It's not as big as some other open-world games, but it's full of period-accurate details, old-school cars, vintage architecture, and a jazz soundtrack that fits the 1930s setting perfectly. It's not about sandbox chaos, but more about immersing you in the time period and atmosphere. Combat and driving have been updated from the original, and it feels much smoother. The gunplay is tight, and the cover system makes shootouts feel intense without dragging things down. And the cars? Yeah, they're slow as hell compared to modern games, but it fits the time, and that old school feel gives the driving sections a unique charm. If you missed the original Mafia, or just want to experience one of the best crime stories in gaming, Mafia Definitive Edition is absolutely worth your time. It's not just a nostalgia trip, it's a well-crafted remake that stands on its own with a narrative that hooks you from start to finish.
You won't ever need to worry about me. Okay then. Welcome to the family.
Well, everyone, that was all for this video. I hope you like my list. Please make sure to like the video and let me know what video you would like to see next, and I will make it. Now I will see you in the next video. Have a good day.